Okay, welcome to part 10 of Being All We Are Created to Be, All I Am Created to Be, our metaphysical Bible interpretation of the Gospels, the stories contained within the first four books of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And you have the handout there. This is titled 7 Steps to Transformation, is the title of today's lesson, having to do with the Gospel of John. And I've also given you a handout. On one side is the outline for an 8-week class, 12 hours worth of material on the Gospel of John in the format of the 7 signs or the 7 miracles, and on the back is the 7th sign, because that's where we're ending up today. To give you an idea, so in this half hour that I'm going to be going over this material, I'm going to be giving you 12 hours worth of material. No.
The condensed version.
The condensed version, exactly. So let's get to it. The 7 steps to transformation. The Gospel according to John is often called the spiritual gospel, for it differs dramatically from the 3 synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, both in form and content as well as in favor. And you were mentioning earlier, Charles Fillmore talks about getting away from the material and into the spiritual. Mm-hmm. And that's where we're headed, getting away from the material, which is the effect. All this outer world, all the stuff that's happening around us is the effect of what's going on within us. And so the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke are good. They have spiritual material in them as well, but John is different. And so that's why I've brought that out as a separate study. His focus is on the principle of creation, or the Word, the Logos, from verses 1 through 18, as the expression of God, and equates it with the underlying essence of physical manifestation. So it begins in John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. That's 1 through 5 there. This parallels the very beginning of the Old Testament story of creation from Genesis 1 through 2:3. The Word, God said, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made. That's from Psalms 33. But now this principle of creation has become flesh and dwelt among us. It is inherent in every son and daughter of God. So what we have at the beginning of the Gospel of John is a throwback all the way back to the beginning of creation. From the very first period of time in which creation was happening. We know at the end of each of the 7 days, during each of the 7 days, God said, let there be light. God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. God said, let there be seed-bearing plants. God said, there be a lesser and greater light. God said, God said, God said. And here we have, in the Greek, it's the word logos. And John most likely had been on the island of Patmos, we know, for a period of time, which was a Greek speaking, so he most likely spoke Greek, and probably because the people he was speaking with and talking to, I'm sure he probably wrote this primarily in Greek. And so that word logos, there's a whole background of a spiritual path that goes around with that word logos. It was a cult. People worshipped the logos, worshipped the word. There's power in our words. That's the essence, one of the essential studies or principles of new thought and of unity is the power of the word. The power of the spoken word. As we speak the word, so things come unto us, so things happen. You know, that the word is not just the letters on the page, it's not just the spoken word, but it's the power, the imaging power that focuses the power of faith in a particular way. So it's creating, if we focus our words, if we're very clear, if our thoughts and words and actions all align with spirit, then we become what I call laser beam consciousness. In other words, you know how these fluorescent lights and the incandescent lights spread their light out in whatever direction, in all directions. But a laser beam takes that same light, in fact, even a lesser amount of light, and focuses it in one direction, and it can heal, it can burn, it can do all sorts of things. And that's the way it is with our consciousness. When we get laser beam consciousness, we get focused. And when we focus all of our energies in the same direction through that power of the Word, through the Logos.
And Christ used the word light so often.
Yeah, exactly.
And we use it in our language a lot of times in ways other than the traditional meaning. And people don't really recognize it. We say we're enlightened, or I see the light, and that type of thing. And I'll just share that the latest research in Europe, particularly, and this is from Lynn McTaggart's book, she said they've always tried to find out what it was that allowed the body and all the myriad cells and organs and every trillions of cells, everything to work in harmony together, and to do so without stepping on the toes of the other. And the latest research indicates that the communicative medium that our body, and in fact all living organisms, use is light. And they're called biophoton emissions, and they're bursts of light. And so in Europe, some of the latest cancer research, for instance, is focused on what would block light and what would then unblock whatever it was that blocked light. So I always thought that was, as I first read that, so fascinating, because when Christ said, "I am the light of the world," you could feel his overall completeness, because he was not just speaking metaphorically, he was speaking literally as well. That it was literally light that allows us, and of course, without the plants we don't live, and without the light the plants don't.
Oh, we are beings of light, there's no doubt about it. And we just slowed down. Light slowed down enough that it looks like physical stuff. And we got to keep that light growing within us by affirming that we are the light and being the light. The Gospel according to John is organized around the framework of 7 miracles or signs of Jesus. We consider them miracles, but John called them signs. We'll look at that in a moment. This parallels not only the 7 days of creation found in Genesis, but the 7-fold series of 7 visions, which defines the book of Revelation. This is significant of the power of the Logos, or the Word, which is the creative principle of divine self, and of our abilities to tap into this power when we have ears to hear. The creative principle, that's what we're talking about. That's what we can refer to from the book of Genesis, the 7 days of creation, and from this book we're looking at the Word is the creative principle. It's that power of creation, that we use our words to create our own reality. And again, words are not just letters on a page or the words that we speak, but really the imagination, the thought, the understanding, the wisdom, that all of that brought together in one creative burst, if you will, laser beam burst. So we go into the signs. The first sign occurs within the story of the wedding at Cana. You remember the story where Jesus is a wedding guest and they've run out of wine, and Mother Mary comes to him and says, "Hey, you haven't given your wine yet." And he says, "Oh, it's not my turn. I'm not ready yet. It's not my turn." Then he goes to the waiters and he says, "Okay, take some jars of water, and serve those up." And when he served them up, it was the best wine yet. There's a lot we can do with that story. If we had 12 hours, we could go into that in detail. But we're going to cover just the basic understanding of what this is all about. So this signifies a union. A wedding is a union. And it's a transformation, right? Water becoming wine. It's a union of 2 states of consciousness, male and female, and the water being transformed into wine. Transformation is a balancing act. All aspects of self are to be aligned in preparation for lifting us to a new level of expression. Charles Fillmore If you really want to get into the Gospel of John, Charles Fillmore, one of his books is Mysteries of John, which goes through the whole book, not quite as in detail as he does with the book of Genesis. I mean, that's a book like that, but 3 times as big. But he does cover most of what's in the Gospel of John. He says, water may be compared to natural or human life, and wine to spiritual life. In the regeneration, spirit and body are united. But before this union can be accomplished, the exhausted natural life must be quickened with spirit, which is symbolized by the turning of water to wine. This transformation of the negative watery fluid of the organism into the vitalizing spirit is accomplished by adding to every word a spiritual idea, to spiritualize our words, to give it a spiritual idea. The idea of omnipresent life will then quicken the natural life. The omnipresent life will then quicken the natural life in man, and it will make conscious contact with the one life and draw it out for the benefit of the many. So we're lifting that natural awareness, that natural man, to a spiritual level. We're transforming. So this is the beginning of the transformative process, is to bring a union between mind and body, between spirit, mind, and body, between spirit and matter. We so often think of things, well, spirit's out there, it's ether, it's something separate. Matter is this hard stuff that we can touch. The fact is, there's no separation between the two. It's all one. It's kind of like the difference between ice, water, and steam. It's all water, but at different levels of activity. We call it heat. When we take heat away, it turns into ice. When we add heat, it turns into steam, but it's all water. And that's a 3-dimensional discussion of a 5th-dimensional concept, that as we add energy, matter becomes spirit. E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the spirit of light. So we can't add energy, but we can transform it from matter into pure energy. It's not one is separate from the other, but they all exist within each other. It's like the yin and the yang. Within the center of the yin is a dot of yang. Within the center of the yang is a dot of yin. The seed for the opposite is within the one. And they all flow together. They're not really separate. That whole flowing idea is they're flowing into each other. They're shown as black and white, or 2 different colors, but really they're flowing into each other. There's no separation between the two. So the first sign is about that transformation of dominant states of consciousness that we get stuck in. Separation. You're over there, I'm over here. You're right, I'm wrong. Or I'm right, you're wrong. Something like that.
So really,
I'm good, you're bad.
Of perspective.
It's beginning to get beyond the 2-dimensional thinking that exists within this 3-dimensional realm.
And a seeing of everyone and all life as one, as the oneness, and not beginning that separation. So there is a good and a bad, or a mine and a yours, or any of that. It's
these are concepts that we have created.
To the essence of what we were created as before we arrived.
Right. But these are concepts that we have created that separate us from each other, that separate us from God, that separate us from good, that separate us from being all that we are created to be. The title of this study, Being All I Am Created to Be. We're part of the whole. And the whole exists because we exist. And we exist within the whole, and the whole exists within us. Not only do I live and move and have my being in God, but God lives and moves and has its being within me. I'm not just a drop of water out of the ocean, but I am the ocean in expression. Just as the wave is an expression of the ocean, I am an expression of God. The ocean does not exist without the wave, and the wave does not exist without the ocean. The second sign is the healing of the official sun in chapter 4. And this signifies a new universal awareness of the relationship of man and God. Remember, this is, all of a sudden, he's dealing with somebody who's not a Jew. The official's son. The official was a Roman. And the Roman son was ill, and so he does an absentee healing. It's the first discussion of an absentee healing. He's not even there. The son's at home. The official comes to him. He says, your son has been healed. The official goes home. And the son is healed. And he says, what time? When did it happen? And it was at the same hour that Jesus said, your son is healed. So not only is this for people outside of any particular faith or creed, but it's non-local. That's a term that's used in science these days, and I'm sure I don't have a correct scientific understanding, but how we normally think of things as being limited to the speed of light. It's the fastest anything can travel. And yet things happen instantaneously light years apart, or at least over long distances. That there is a non-local effect between things that have been close together. You take them apart and you make a change to one and the other one changes. It's called the non-local effect. At the quantum level, there is no limitation as to how there's a connection that continues to be instantaneous, even though they're not connected anymore. That there's a non-local.
Think about, it's just so fun to think about, and like when people talk about like near-death experiences and how that's all linked,
Near-death experiences, how they're all linked.
How it's linked to like the non-local ideas of quantum physics and
Okay.
how you can be here and yet
In another realm,
dimension.
another dimension at the
Yeah.
same time. Exactly.
yeah.
Well,
Well, they're starting to talk about we live in a multiverse.
Mhm.
That there are multiple dimensions, at least 11 that they've been able to account for. I can't wrap my mind around all of them yet. That all exist simultaneously within the same space and time.
Brian Greene, who along
Brian
with
Greene,
Stephen
uh-huh.
Hawking are
Mhm.
probably the two top living quantum physicists.
Right.
In his most recent book, The Hidden Realities, where he talks about the latest research that indicates about how many dimensions there are. Three things that really struck me. One, he said, the basic tenet of quantum is everything exists in a limitless wave of potential until you try to observe it or quantify it, and then it becomes a discrete particle or attribute. He says the latest research, and this is all theoretical mathematics so far beyond, when I read his books, I read about 2 pages, and then I have to reread them about 5 times, and then I think about it for a few days before I go on. He says the latest research indicates that there are so many dimensions that the theoretical mathematics indicates that every conceivable, possible, potential outcome exists in a dimension that happens. And that there are that many of us out there. And then at the end of the book, for no reason at all, which added nothing to the actual theories of the book, which he put out there, he said, we're not sure if we are happening or if we are a hologram of something that's happening out on the event horizon, which is as far out as they can see. And he said, I would just add that if you took a poll of all the quantum physicists today, the majority would say that they believe that there is a simulator out there simulating this. And I thought, he so carefully avoided, as a scientist, adding a religious connotation to it. But the fact that he felt compelled to add that at the end of his book, that he thinks that the people are starting to recognize that there is a great intelligence that is leading this whole thing, was just, that was powerful.
And a lot of physicists would say that that's poppycock and
Sure.
and nonsense. But it's one of the possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And more physics is becoming philosophy, because you can't prove it. It's not provable within the 3 dimensions, because it's a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th dimensional experience that you cannot prove within the 3 dimensions of space and time that we're, or 4 dimensions of space and time which we are inhabiting. And so it's only a conceptual. And so physics is becoming more and more a philosophy.
And potential.
Yeah, in potential, exactly. The third miracle is the healing of the man at Bethsaida, chapter 5. That's where he's at the pools, 38 years, an invalid, 38 being too short of 40, which is the time it takes. 38, 3 plus 8 is 11, which is 1 less than 12, which is spiritual completion. So we see it's not the right time. It's it never seems to be the right time, and you're not evolved enough to experience this healing, and yet Jesus comes into this and adds the necessary dimension that assists in his healing. So it's the healing of the man at Bethsaida. This signifies a new relationship with the world. The world is an expression of spirit. Spirit can work through the physical. So Bethsaida was a healing center. There's 5 porches, and all the different healers in the area would come and practice their arts. So it was a physical healing. They would be doing whatever they were. The herbs, the spices, the bloodletting, whatever advanced medical techniques they had back in those days were being practiced at Bethsaida, which in the King James Version is Bethesda, so that's where we get the word Bethesda Medical Center. And so he comes into this healing center, this he comes into the hospital and does his healing work there.
And that's where you spoke on a few weeks ago when Jesus asked him, "Are you willing?"
Are you willing? Exactly. There was a willingness that was necessary. And Charles, in his book, talks about, do not be limited by so-called established laws of nature or by the soul's mortal thought that if you have reached the age of 38, the life current is beginning to wane, that your Sabbath or day of rest is setting in. It is lawful in spirit to declare the perpetual activity of life anywhere, at any time, and under any and all circumstances. Divine life takes no cognizance of the laws that the intellect has set up for governing it. We live by a set of laws that we have established for ourselves. From whatever background that we've come from, parents, teachers, other kids, everybody in our life we've bought into this set of rules and regulations and laws of how things work and how, what we can do and what we can't do and what's right and what's wrong, and we have to bring that level of spiritual awareness into that and blow it out and say, it doesn't matter what you think is right or wrong. It doesn't matter whether the water's troubled or not. You can be healed. So that was the whole idea. He was waiting for the water to get into the water when it was troubled because that would bring a healing. It's an artesian well, the kind of, where it bubbles up from underneath the ground. And they thought the spirits were active at that time that you could be healed. Which, if you think you can, you probably can. Right? It's a mind of it's mind over matter. Mind over matter.
And that's where we deal with our ego and our subconscious a lot.
Oh, yeah.
That is the accumulation of all of the limitations that we've been placed, or the wounds that we've received, and coming to see that is the illusion, that is maybe been what has been the governing model for our lives. But when you reach to that point where you truly want to move beyond that, is recognizing that is the illusion, and that the spiritual essence that were created with in the very beginning when we first drew breath is the true reality, and that coming back to that place, and to for me at least, it was coming to a place of recognition of how all of that had limited me and how I had lived my life in a way that I didn't necessarily recognize on a conscious level, but others saw it, and once I did, was not happy with that, so I had to let that go, ask for forgiveness not only of creation, but of myself, and then replace it with self-love, which I think in many ways, because of the ego issues and because of some abuse I received as a child, emotional abuse, that self-love was missing. And that was really why I could live my life in that particular way. And then the next layer of the onion was just realizing that all along I was forgiven. All along that actually had taken place, but I had to come into the realization of it so that I could let it go consciously. And then I could recognize that Spirit never gave up on me. Spirit always loved me fully, and that I was always there. I just did not realize it. And then to live from that. Then every time ego tries to pop its head back in and say, no, remember, this is how we do it. It's like, delete. I release you to your highest good because you are not of me, or this is not of me. And so it's an amazing process. And when you spoke a few weeks ago about and really emphasized, are you willing to be healed? And you ask us over, because it was a rather meek response. Are you ready to be healed? Are you willing to be healed? Are you willing to let go of that has been, and you knew really well, was familiar at least, for what is your true essence?
Yep,
and that's powerful.
Yeah, are you willing to be healed? And are you willing to go beyond your preconceived notions of what reality is? We talk about God forgiving us. Well, God has no ability to do other than that, because God is forgiveness. As ye forgive, so shall ye be forgiven. How does it go? As I forgive, I forget my trespasses. Gosh, I can't even. My mind a little blank on that one, but forgive us our trespasses as I forgive those who trespass against me. Forgive my trespasses as we forgive our trespasses against us, we are forgiven. As we are participating in the healing, we are healed. God cannot not love us because God is love, and that which is absolute, there is no opposite. So any appearances of other than love is just an illusion. Does not really exist. And that's what Jesus, talking about the devil. You're, of your father the devil, or he's talking to these guys, says you're the father of the devil, who is a lie, and a liar, and speaks of his own nature. So it's a lie that speaks about lying. It's the beginning point of error to believe that there is something other than God, other than good. And once we get beyond that, then we can begin to see the good in all situations, in all people, places, and things. To have a new relationship with the ultimate, infinite, unlimited, eternal existence, which is God. Whenever we think that this person has something against me, or I have something against that other person, or that I'm not getting all the love I deserve, or blah, 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 then we're putting up a barrier between ourselves and God and everything else. And so we have to take that barrier down through forgiveness, through release, through letting go, so that we can let God be God in us. So we move on to number 4. So the fourth miracle or sign is the feeding of the 5,000 in John chapter 6, where the disciples come to him. All these people have come and to listen, to participate in his preaching. They followed him because of the miracles, the signs that he has done, which we've only seen a few, but it must have been, they only talk about a few, but there must have been quite a few others, because it got a lot of people's attention, because it says that there were 5,000 men. Who knows how many women and children there were, because they didn't count at that time. They only counted the men. There was 5,000 men. And they came, and the disciples say, how are we to, I think it was sort of a gestural, a joking way. And he said, well, how are we going to feed all these people? They knew that there was food available. There's no 7-Elevens or anything like that. People don't go out into the woods without food and expect, be gone all day without bringing something with them. And, Jesus looks over and, there's a lad with 5 loaves and 2 fish. The symbology of the 5 loaves and the 2 fish is much more than the 5,000. Why were there 5,000? Why wasn't it 3,000 or 4,000? In another case, they do say 4,000. It's a whole different story. But, why was it 6,000 or 5,537? But they say 5,000. Well, 5 is the number of physicality. We have 5 fingers on each hand, 5 toes, 5 senses. It's sense nature. And in our sense nature, we experience lack and limitation. We see that there's not enough. But in our spiritual nature, which that's the addition of the 2 fish, for our non-physical senses, our clairvoyance and intuition, our connection with each other in this realm, and then the intuition which connects us to the higher realms. Those are the 2 additional senses that are represented by the fish. So we're lifted out of the physical sense conscious up into a spiritual awareness. This is physical completion. This that leads up to the 12, which brings the 5 inner senses in, and we get 5 plus 7 is 12. To bring us up to that spiritual completion. So when we have those additional senses of clairvoyance and intuition, then we always know the right thing to do. This creates a new awareness of God as substance, the source of all there is, everywhere present, abundantly available to fulfill our every desire. On page 69 here in the book, Charles says, Jesus and his disciples were on a mountain when this great increase of substance took place, which indicates a high state of consciousness. They were up on a mountain. And they were elevated by the 2 fish above the physical sense nature. It says, science says that we live in an invisible ether pregnant with the essence of all visible things, that this essence is wrapped up in the atom, and that it awaits an as yet undiscovered law to set it free. Jesus knew the law, and through him we may know it. And then he goes on to talk about, this was written in 1946, so he talks about the atom bomb and a few other things. A little later in his last book that he wrote was called Atom Smashing Power of Mind, which is 1948 was when that was published, at the age of 94. Published right after he died. He would have been 94 by the time it published. A new awareness of God as substance. So we're moving beyond this separation consciousness to an awareness of the allness of the isness. It's an interesting statement, but if you think about it, the allness of the isness, there is nothing but God. All there is God, and God is. So the allness of the isness. It's an interesting concept.
And it was only been a decade that scientists have known. They always thought space was empty, but only in the last decade have they discovered what they call dark matter, because it was invisible to them before.
A little longer than that, but yeah.
Yeah, roughly.
I know I was talking about it.
Empty space is energy.
I know I was talking about it 20 years ago, so
okay.
It's been longer than that.
Okay.
But yeah, that there is no such thing as empty space.
Right.
That what we see as is either dark matter or dark energy.
And do you know what the percentage of it is?
Well, 96% of
well,
the
they
universe.
They said 72 in what's his name's book.
Well, there's difference between dark matter and dark energy. I think dark matter is 72, and the rest is.
And then 27% is the actual material, planets, sun, stars.
Okay, that's different.
And of course, 27 and 72 are the opposite of each other. And so I think it's 72.8% of space is empty
and
that has the dark matter.
20. Yeah. So it adds up to 100.
So he was very intuitive. Yeah. Yeah, it does. It does.
Uh-huh. And on to the 5th sign, as it says here, this substance is readily manifest as we learn to do the works of God, which is the significance of the healing of the man born blind. Again, we're outside the temple, And this man, it's on a Sabbath, of course. Well, he loved to heal on the Sabbath. I think, it's like everywhere else. People take the day off, and they're more readily available. They're not at work, so they can congregate.
You have a bigger audience.
You have a bigger audience. They're congregating, but according to the law of Moses, the Old Testament, you're not supposed to do anything on the Sabbath. Of course, you still have priests doing priestly things, but that's just And somebody has to serve the food. Of course, the women, that's their job, so they don't count.
So
So,
they didn't get the Sabbath off.
somebody had to serve the food.
Who's going to take care of the kids?
Yeah.
Right.
If you didn't have a slave,
So if you're volunteering to heal someone, then that's working?
that's working. Yeah, it's working on the Sabbath. It makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Jesus' disciples walking through the field, plucking the grain off of the stalks to eat the grain, that was considered working because they were plucking they weren't just picking it up out of a sack, they were actually taking it off the stalk. The literalist, and that's what Jesus was riling against, was protesting against, speaking out against the literalists, and it's over and over and over again in the New Testament. It just amazes me how so many people who call themselves Christians say that you have to take it literally, even though he was right. He was. If you take it literally, then they want to take the things literally that were meant to be taken metaphysically, and the things that are metaphysically or spiritually, the things that were meant to be taken literally. It's funny how that works. They say the same thing about us, I guess. But.
Well, and I think that's part of spiritual growth on this planet, is that, what did Christ say? Many will come through the wide gate, and but few will come through the
narrow gate.
Narrow gate. And you don't want to make any kind of value judgment on it, but it is interesting that that realization comes to some people. And when most biblical scholars will tell you that they believe 85% of the Bible is written in story, metaphor, or parable in form. And so to then insist that all of that is literal, when in fact much of it is very clearly intended to be. And in fact, Christ says, I'm speaking, or
I speak in parables.
Him,
yeah, speaking in parables. Without a parable did I not speak. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's
selective.
His whole life is a parable.
Yeah.
And we understand that this is most likely a composite character, that they brought in stories from other events of the day. Jesus, there was many people called Jesus. There were many people who were sons of light, etc., etc. I don't know for sure. I mean, we have this story of the man named Jesus, but we also have 4 different stories that sometimes contradict each other. So that's not the important part to me.
Right.
That's the physical. That's getting stuck on the physical plane, getting stuck on the sense consciousness, and realizing that there's a reason why this material came to us, and to look beyond the literal, because the literal word, these were stories that were put down into writing, and we have to look what was the meaning behind it. What can we get out of it? What is the overall big picture that's being painted here? Well, that we are one with God. We're made in the image and after the likeness of God. That the Word, through the power of the spoken word, through the power of the Logos, which comes down into English as word, capital W word, which means more than just the writing on the page, more than just the thoughts that I think, but the emotional as well as the physical and the intellectual and the spiritual coming into play. It's like, I don't know if you have ever talked about the doctrine of forms, Plato, and how most people are like prisoners locked up in a cave, and they're facing a wall, and there's a light behind them, and all these people are passing by, and things are happening, and they're seeing the shadows of what's, and that's all they know, and that's what's real for them. And somebody escapes, but then is recaptured and comes back, and he talks about all the people and the shapes and the forms and the colors, and everybody who's been watching this wall says, no, you're crazy, that doesn't exist, this is real. This is what's real, is the shadow on the wall.
Yes. It seems to have been the Council of Nicaea, and there were two, 325 AD, I think it was, when many of the Gospels were eliminated, and that's when reincarnation was voted out by one vote. And I believe that was overseen by Constantine, which was the first Roman emperor to convert. And so it seems that's when the shift actually took place, where it went from Christ's literal teachings and that what had been carried on by the disciples and the people that followed the disciples, and then when institutional, as you will, or state and church and state came together and took control of it and eliminated things that would have turned people's spiritual journey inward as finding a personal relationship within them rather than having to come to an organization to get that very same experience, and only their version counted or was legitimate and that type of thing. So, and what you were saying about all of the word, is intention a good way of thinking of that?
Intention's part of it.
Intention is
Intention.
behind what you say.
When our intentions are aligned with spirit and our actions. So the intentions are a good thing. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. If you don't follow through on them, they burn within us. And so we have to follow through on them. I realized I just did the parable. I told you the parable of the cave instead of the doctrine of forms, but I want to move on here. So the sixth sign is the raising of Lazarus, which I've talked a little bit before. This represents overcoming the last enemy, which is death. That death has no real existence. That we are more than this physical mass of protoplasm. That life is more than the physical. And that sets the stage for the last great demonstration, the crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. And we have to realize that this is a process that we go through all the time. Crucifixion, resurrection, we have to cross out. We have to, as it says here, release and let go in order to renew. And then, that's necessary for the ascension. Jesus would not have ascended had he not gone through the crucifixion and the resurrection to the ascension. So we have to cross out, we have to let go of, we have to release all that is holding us back, all that is limiting us to this physical existence, to this plane of pain and suffering and sorrow, in order to renew, to be born again. And then after we've been born again, we can rise up to a new level, a higher level, which is called the ascension. The book of Revelation is all about the new heaven and the new earth, the new Jerusalem. The new heaven and the new earth is a great parable which shows when we have a new earth, we have a new heaven. When heaven becomes our new earth, so we have a conception of what heaven would be, that new job, the new wife, the new spouse, the new, this greater level of expression. We reach that, and what happens? Well, we come up with a new heaven. So the new earth creates a new heaven. And so we are continually ascending up that spiral as we get more and more centered in ourselves. When we go as young children, when we're first born, everything, we're all part of everything. Everything's part of us. And then we start understanding boundaries between who and what we are and who somebody else is, and what's right and wrong and left and right and up and down and good and bad, and we get all these rules. And then as we get older, speaking from experience, I start letting go of a lot of that, the right and wrong. Well, I have to be productive. I have to, be successful. I have to, do all these different things, and eventually start thinking, well, that's not what makes me happy. That's not what satisfies me. Having a lot more free time, having a lot more prayer time, having a lot more meditation time, a lot of physical activity, balancing all of that out is much more productive for me, in making me feel fulfilled. And even though I'm, earning less money than I was when I was in my early 30s, that was a long time ago, and I'm still not making as much money as I was then, even with inflation. So, and that's, I'm I'm much happier, much more fulfilled in my life today. And so that leads us, the release, renew, and regenerate. And a resurrection takes place in us every time we rise to a realization of the perpetual indwelling life that connects us with the Father. So having more time, investing more of our energy into recognizing and realizing the presence and power of God within us and around us and within all things. Practicing synchronicity, being aware of the synchronicity, it's like practicing the presence of God, being aware that God is around us at all times, and that all things are working together for our good. That's what synchronicity is all about, meaningful coincidences. That's a starting place. To realize that something happens, it doesn't matter whether we like it or not, it's all happening for our good. And seeing the synchronicity, okay, this happened, I didn't like it, but it led me to do this.
Do you think that's God tapping us on the shoulder?
Absolutely, yeah. God directing us. Like I said, this is a 12 hours worth of material that we're covering in a very short time. And so I want to go ahead and bring this to a closure. Take a moment.